The night my sister looked straight at me and said, "Addison Cox, you'll never be anything more than a girl who plays with numbers." Something inside me shattered so quietly, no one at that dinner table even noticed. She said it like a verdict. She said it knowing it would sting, and everyone else just sat there, letting her words settle over me like dust on something they'd all stopped valuing. That was the moment I understood the role I'd been assigned in my own family. Not a daughter, not a sister, just a shadow standing behind someone they decided was more important. I didn't fight back. I didn't even blink. But that was the night I made a decision, one she would never see coming, one that would later bring her entire world crashing down. And this is the story of how the truth finally came for her. I stepped back into Montana under a sharp early fall chill, the kind that slipped through my jacket and pulled old memories up whether I wanted them or not. The ranch looked exactly the same, rolling grass stretching toward the mountains, the warped wooden barn, that familiar blend of hay and worn leather floating in the air. Everything seemed frozen in time, everything except me. Or maybe I only hoped that were true. Seattle had given me years of quiet, years where numbers spoke more honestly than people. But coming home wasn't about comfort. It was obligation. My father's birthday had a way of tugging me across state lines, no matter how far I tried to stay. The moment I walked through the door, the air shifted. Harper was already at the center of the living room, gathering every gaze without even trying. She moved with the authority of someone long used to being admired, setting down stacks of colorful folders while my father leaned in, listening as though her voice carried the secrets of the world. My mother hurried between the table and stove, preparing for the guests Harper brought along, rearranging the house as if it belonged to her. Harper greeted me with a delicate hug, the kind people give when they're unsure how close they should be. It felt polite, distant, like we hadn't shared the same childhood walls. I slipped into the kitchen, dish towel handed to me before I even asked. Harper's laughter carried in from the other room, bright enough to drown out everything else. The truth was simple. I didn't hate her. I just never learned how to stay visible beside someone who effortlessly drew all the light. My father's birthday dinner took place inside the old barn we'd turned into a makeshift dining hall. Dressed up tonight in warm string lights and long wooden tables that looked more like the setting for a fundraising gala than a family gathering. Everything, from the Western-style barbecue to the curated decor, reflected Harper's taste, not my mother's. It was clear whose presence the evening was built around. Harper raised her wine glass with the poise of someone presenting quarterly results, her voice carrying effortlessly over the room as she talked about AgriSpring's expansion into Wyoming, the surge in demand for hybrid seeds, and the articles praising the company as the next major force in American agriculture. Applause rippled along the table. I stayed still, letting the praise wash over her like it always did. Then she glanced my way, wearing that familiar half-smile, sweet on the surface, sharp underneath. "So, Addison, anything new in Seattle? Your data project's still going?" The way she broke the sentence made it sound like a hobby I was expected to outgrow. I answered simply, "Still going well," because feeding her more would only invite more commentary. She tilted her head thoughtfully. "You should try doing something real one day. Running a company is a lot different from staring at charts." A few people chuckled. I steadied my breath, the way I had learned to do around her. As the conversation shifted back to her accomplishments, my attention drifted to Luis, her operations head, his rigid posture, the constant checking of his phone, and the way he tugged at his sleeve told a different story than Harper's glowing performance. Nearby, Brent, the CFO, kept fidgeting with a pen until the cap rolled across the table. They were small signals most people would miss, but I'd spent 2 years reading patterns no one else cared to see. Later, in the kitchen, while helping my mother plate the food, she asked if I was still doing my computer work. I offered a small smile. "I know more about AgriSpring than you think." "Mom." But I didn't elaborate. Some truths aren't meant for casual conversation. Some need the right moment to matter. I'd kept a black notebook for 2 years, its worn pages filled with discrepancies from AgriSpring's public reports. That morning, sitting on my parents' porch, I reviewed the familiar patterns again. Unusual inventory spikes, transportation costs shuffled off the books, revenue recognized early, and a defect rate that crept far above industry norms. The numbers had become a language only I seemed willing to read. Months earlier, I had warned my father about the ranch's supply contract. His response still echoed in my mind. "Addison, don't let your worries overshadow what's actually fine." It hurt, not because he dismissed the data, but because he dismissed me. Silence felt easier than being brushed aside again. That evening, while Harper bragged about a new deal, Louis stepped outside to take a call. He returned seconds later, but his expression had drained to paper white. Leaning toward Harper, he whispered something urgent. 3 words broke through the background noise. Fungus, recall, Colorado. Harper slammed her glass onto the table hard enough to jolt the guests. All the irregularities I'd tracked pointed to financial trouble. But this was something deeper, something that could unravel the company from the inside out. Yet Harper straightened her shoulders, forced a smile, and continued entertaining the room, pretending nothing had shifted. But I knew better. The first fracture had already appeared, and fractures never stay small for long. The evening had been moving along quietly enough when my phone started buzzing, once, then again, then in a relentless stream that tightened something deep in my spine. A quick glance was all it took to send my pulse climbing, 44 alerts flashing across the screen, each one announcing a sharper plunge in AgriSpring's stock. 9.8%, 14.2%, 17.9%. I pushed my chair back, trying to keep my voice steady as I told my father I needed to take a call. Stepping onto the wooden porch, I dialed my broker. The Montana air hit me hard, clearer and colder than any warning bell on Wall Street could ever be. His voice came through frantic, confirming the freefall and adding the detail that made my stomach drop. Reports of contaminated seed, a recall rumor, leaks reaching the press. I closed my eyes for a moment. The numbers had been whispering trouble for months. But when the market decides to wake up, it never wakes up gently. Then came the blow I hadn't braced for. A significant sell-off had accelerated the plunge. A massive block dumped just the day before. A block I knew all too well. A block that was mine. And no one inside that house, least of all Harper, had any idea. I walked back into the warmth of the dining room, but the laughter now sounded distant, warped by the knowledge pressing at my ribs. Harper rose to meet me, tossing a jab about my supposed obsession with data. I didn't respond, but Luis's eyes tracked mine, lingering with a quiet realization that unsettled both of us. My father reached for the remote to play a birthday song, but instead of music, the television blared breaking news about suspected contamination and AgriSpring stock dropping over 22%. Harper froze. Her glass struck the table with a sharp clang. She muttered something about a technical glitch, but even she didn't sound convinced. The truth was never a glitch. It was the consequence finally arriving. The knock that followed felt like a verdict. My mother, startled, nearly dropped the tablecloth she was straightening. When my father opened the door, 2 local reporters stood on the porch with a camera van blinking behind them, asking about contaminated seed and whether our ranch had supplied any of the batches now under scrutiny. In an instant, the crisis that had lived inside Harper's world spilled violently into ours. Luis approached her, voice trembling as he relayed a message from Colorado. The Department of Agriculture was halting all shipments from the plant pending investigation. Harper's gaze snapped toward me, sharp and cornered, demanding to know whether I'd known anything beforehand. I stayed silent, not out of defiance, but because I refused to throw the truth like a weapon when she was already on the edge. Her voice rose, accusing me of playing analyst with no understanding of real leadership. Before I could answer, Luis made the mistake of speaking plainly, revealing that AgriSpring had received 3 separate contamination warnings over the last 3 months. My mother's whisper, asking whether Harper had hidden this from us, cut deeper than Harper's panic. She tried to defend herself, pointing to stock performance, but the numbers were collapsing faster than her excuses. I told her the latest drop, and the color drained from her face. Then her phone buzzed. She read the message, and her expression shattered. A major shareholder had sold 24 hours earlier. Her eyes swept the room, burning with betrayal, as she demanded to know who had triggered the panic. The silence that followed felt suffocating. The weight of my notebook in my coat pocket became unbearable, not because of its pages, but because of the truth stitched between them. Harper's phone chimed again. She read the notification aloud. Cox Rural Holdings, LLC. Our family's name. A name tied to both of us. When she looked up, her voice cracked around the question, whether it had been me. My father stood. My mother clutched her chest. The room felt carved out of ice. I steadied myself and answered, yes. It was me. But what Harper didn't know, what no one yet understood, was that I hadn't sold to sabotage her. I sold because the collapse had been coming for a long time, and she, the one leading the charge, had been the last to see it. Harper stared at me as if the ground had opened beneath her feet. The executives beside her, Luis, Brent, and the company attorney, shifted their attention toward me with the stunned caution of people realizing the damage was much closer than they'd believed. The room thickened around us. My heartbeat thudded in my ears, slow and heavy, each pulse a reminder that everything I'd tried to prevent had finally erupted. My mother's voice cracked as she asked if I had really sold before the stock collapsed. I nodded. Carefully, the way someone confirms a truth they know will hurt. I said I had a reason, but my father surged from his chair, sending it crashing to the floor. He didn't shout, but the disappointment in his tone struck harder than anger. He demanded to know what justification I could possibly have for doing something like this to my own sister. I told him the truth the only way I knew how. Plainly, I had seen signs they refused to see. I hadn't sabotaged anything. I'd simply refused to sink with something already heading underwater. Harper let out a bitter laugh, warped by emotion she couldn't contain, accusing me of acting on inside information and pretending innocence now that everything was out in the open. I tightened my grip on the notebook at my side and said I hadn't used any privileged knowledge, only the numbers. Luis finally stepped forward, admitting that I wasn't lying. He confirmed that I had identified exactly what they had tried to bury. And the room erupted all over again. Luis delivered the first blow, not aimed at me. The company had received 3 contamination alerts over the past 3 months, all ignored at Harper's instruction to keep the quarter's results clean for the Wyoming announcement. Harper snapped at him for saying it out loud, but he didn't back down. Even Brent stepped away from her, a small motion that said more than words. The attorney followed with another confession. Harper had signed off on 2 manipulated reports he'd advised against. My father leaned on the table as if the truth was physically dragging him downward. My mother whispered through her shock, and Harper scrambled for someone to blame, landing directly on me. But I told her calmly that I hadn't created the fungus, falsified the books, or hidden anything. None of this had come from me. Outside, reporters pounded on the door, their voices cutting through the walls. My father stepped out to hold them back, while my mother yanked the curtain shut, her hands trembling as bright camera lights leaked through the seams. This wasn't the kind of storm my family had ever been prepared for. Harper backed into the cabinet, fear cracking through her voice as she accused me of trying to humiliate her. I let the silence sit before telling her the truth. I didn't want her downfall. I wanted honesty, something she had never allowed in her orbit. I opened my notebook on the counter, revealing pages of discrepancies, screenshots, unusual shifts in inventory, and patterns I had mapped over 2 years. I told her I had watched Agrospring because I feared she was steering the family into danger. She stammered, asking why I'd never told her. I said I had, in ways she'd dismissed, because she never believed anyone who didn't echo her confidence back at her. Then Luis delivered the next blow. I had been right for 4 quarters straight, and internal reviews had confirmed it, but Harper had shut them down. The room fell silent. the kind of silence that branded itself into memory. The attorney's phone rang next. The board wanted Harper in an emergency meeting within the hour. Suspension was likely. Harper nearly collapsed. She looked at me, shaking, and asked why. If I was so capable, I'd never helped her. I told her the truth she'd never made space to hear. I did help. She just never listened. Harper slipped out of the living room, like someone whose bones had turned to sand, and I followed her toward the old horse barn, the place where we once hid from chores and believed the world outside couldn't touch us. The Montana night hit us with a cold so sharp it felt like it was trying to carve the truth straight into our lungs. The lights from the news van flashed through the trees, painting the barn windows in harsh bursts of white. She stood with her back to me, her voice barely holding itself together as she said she hadn't imagined the night would end like this. I didn't offer comfort. There was nothing soft enough to bridge what lay between us now. When she turned, tears slid down her face as she confessed she only wanted our parents to be proud, to see her as the one carrying Agrispring onto the national stage, and that she couldn't bear looking at another failing report. I opened my notebook to the page marked in red and handed it to her. The numbers alone told the truth she refused to face. I reminded her she had seen them too. She had simply chosen denial over accountability. She admitted she thought she could fix it before anyone found out. I told her gently, but firmly, that she had only been trying to hide it. Before she could respond, Luis appeared breathless, announcing the emergency board meeting in 20 minutes and that they wanted answers about my trade. Harper looked at me, trembling, asking what I planned to say. I told her I would tell the truth, and that, finally, was what terrified her most. We gathered in the old kitchen, the same one where my mother once taught us how to peel apples without breaking the ribbon of skin. Tonight, it felt nothing like those warm afternoons. The room had turned into something colder, heavier, more courtroom than kitchen. My father stood at the head of the table, rigid and pale. My mother sat beside him, eyes swollen from trying to hold back tears. Harper faced me across the table, her hands twisting into each other as if she were bracing against an invisible pull. I placed my notebook in the center of the table and opened it to the first page. I told them I had begun tracking Agrispring 2 years earlier, that the numbers had been off from the start, and that I had tried to warn my father. He lowered his head, remembering exactly how he'd brushed it aside. I could see the regret settling on him like dust. I went on, explaining that, when the discrepancies grew worse, I bought shares only so I could monitor the company more closely. No special access, no inside channel, just public data. Data that had been telling the truth long before anyone cared to listen. Harper broke first. Tears spilled as she insisted she hadn't meant to deceive anyone, that she'd only wanted to save the company. I told her gently that she hadn't been trying to save anything except her pride. The tension in the room tightened until even breathing felt intrusive. Luis called to deliver the board's decision. Harper's eyes closed as he read it. She was suspended as CEO pending federal and internal investigations. My mother sobbed openly. My father sank into a chair, looking years older than he had the night before. Harper lifted her gaze to me, her voice cracking as she apologized, truly apologized, for making me carry the weight alone. I held her eyes for a long moment before telling her the truth I'd never said aloud. I never wanted to beat you, Harper. I just wanted you to hear me. I left the ranch before the sun had fully risen. The sky still washed in that pale blue quiet that comes right before morning breaks. A thin layer of mist stretched across the fields, softening the harsh edges of everything that had happened the night before, as if the land itself was trying to spare me one final sting. Before turning onto the road, I let myself look back at the house, the place where I once raced around the windows, where my mother wrapped me in her arms after Harper's teasing, where my father steadied my hands on the reins of my first horse. The memories were flawed, uneven, but they were mine. And despite everything, I loved them all in the way you love things that shaped you, even when they hurt. My phone buzzed. A message from a sustainable agriculture fund in Seattle invited me to join them as an analyst. praising a skill I had spent years defending in silence. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was measuring myself against my sister. I finally felt aligned with the life I was meant to live. Another notification appeared just as I turned onto the dirt road. Harper's name lit up the screen. She thanked me for telling the truth, even when she hated hearing it. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I looked out at the Montana sky, opening wide in front of me. Truth doesn't need applause. It just needs space. I closed my notebook after writing one final line and drove forward, finally outside her shadow and firmly in my own light.